Well, it's 8 o'clock and we are about to kick off the fifth in our series around the power of applied intelligence webinar series from Technology Ireland's ICT SkillNet. So I'm delighted to welcome everyone here this morning. Thank you for joining us on this very lovely morning here in Dublin anyway, and I hope it's lovely where you are too. Today we have a webinar entitled Following the Smart AI Money, Venturing into Artificial Intelligence. And I'm delighted to be joined by three great panelists here today. Before we get kick-started, I just want to let you know the format of the event. The format will be that we will have each of our panelists give a brief introduction to themselves and their context, so you get a little bit of their background, and then we will have a discussion with all of them together. So if you have any questions for any of the panelists as we go along, please do put them into either the chat or the Q&A function, and then we can actually take those for our chat discussion later after the first three presentations are over. So without any further ado, I would like to first welcome to the stage our first presenter, which is Karina Zehetmeier, and I'm delighted to welcome you, Karina. Welcome here. Karina is the CEO and co-founder of Taxtastic. Hey, we're delighted to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Clara, for the nice introduction. Claire, sorry. I am very country today, and please apologies for my non-perfect English. I hope you can follow anyway. So I hope you can see my slides. I guess you can actually. So what am I going to talk about today? So first of all, who am I? I want to give you a quick intro into the AI Austria landscape. Then the startup Taxtastic, what we do. Taxtastic challenges and opportunities, learnings from my own founder's journey and being a female founder. So as already said, I am CEO and co-founder of Taxtastic, and I will talk about it in a minute. Also, we have a side project, which is called Canary Islands. And actually, we do AI training camps or boot camps in nice locations such as Tenerife for coders and non-coders. So if you think that's cool, check it out. And I'm also ambassador of Women in AI Austria and co-director of Guiding Light, which is a center basically bringing together art, human rights, and technology. And last but not least, I'm also teaching at two applied universities, ethics in AI, basically. My background is law, so I'm actually a human rights lawyer. And I came into this field thanks to my brother, who is a machine learning engineer. And so I'm basically on the intersection of both. Looking at the Austrian AI landscape, so we have this company, Enlight AI, which is very active in presenting a yearly presentation of what is actually going on. So if you want to dive into this, take a look at the AI landscape, and you can find all different branches and where companies or organizations are active. And I'm proud to be here with Taxtastic and Women in AI. Okay, jumping right into the tech topic. So Taxtastic is intelligent data processing for the income tax declarations of employees and small businesses. So what is the problem? I guess you all know it. Taxes are a burden, they take time, are prone to error, and they can cost a lot of money. So we thought the solution must be AI, basically having a bit of an automation with artificial intelligence in between when it comes to processing receipts in the context of the taxpayer. So what do we do exactly? I wanted to show you that this is, for example, my private bank account, but just seeing how you have expenses, or you have a seller, or you have an invoice with products, and only looking at this is actually not enough to judge whether this is tax relevant or not. Also, simply looking at a product, such as for example, recipes for the summer, or the book Lean Startup, is not enough either. You need to link this information to the individual context of the taxpayer. In my case, I am CEO of Taxtastic, and for me, the Lean Startup would be tax relevant. The easy summer recipes, either not. So how do we do this? The technology is called natural language processing. And we, as said before, we go through invoices, we read the products, and then also connect them to bank transactions, and then link them to the individual business or individual taxpayer in order to make a categorization. Our current products, so we have basically two. So we have an API which can be integrated in existing applications. Here you see an example of a big tax firm called BDO. And we also have our own application, which is called Tax at Home, which has more than 40,000 downloads, mostly in Austria, but also in Germany, with more than 10,000 active users and very good ratings in the app stores. So looking at my use case or our use case, what are the challenges and opportunities? So we are in a highly regulated field. So this means that many are afraid of entering this area and think it's boring. So that's an advantage, but also it makes it much more difficult than simply selling goods online, for example. We have many competitors, which signalizes that we really are solving a problem that needs to be solved. Many that failed, but it also makes it hard because, when many investors say, okay, we've tried this once, so we're not interested in going into this again. We are really building a very complex technology, so it makes it very hard to copy us. But on the other hand, it is very hard to sell what we are doing. So you can't see it; it's somewhere in the background, so it's really hard to sell also. And then the tax branch as such is very conservative, and some of our potential clients even feel threatened by what we're doing. And the big advantage, we have a very big market that we are addressing. So learnings from a founder. First, when we started, we really wanted to do something with AI. And I wouldn't recommend this to anyone because what you really need to look at is you don't need to really think about the technology, but rather the real problem you want to solve, the world you want to live in. And then focusing on the problem, it really doesn't matter that much with which technology you're solving it. The important thing is that you are so passionate about solving this one problem in the world that you can stick to it even if times get very hard. And sometimes you will have to change the ideas and approaches you were focusing on in the first place. Just to give you an inspiration, if you don't know what to solve yet, there is the SDGs that I put here, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. So you can take a look at them and also read a lot of papers about them from the United Nations. And there are so many problems that needs to be solved, and women are perfectly in place to actually solve or have impact startup. Also, it's super important to have a goal in mind and to really focus on getting there. As you saw, what I'm doing is not the best way because I'm doing 5 things at a time. So ideally, you're really focusing on getting where you want to be. Very important, everything takes much longer than you think. So startups really need 5 to 7 years on average to achieve an exit, what is apparently also one of the biggest goals of startups. So if you want investors, it's good to have in mind this idea of selling your company at some point, which I wasn't aware of at all when I got started. Also, when is the right moment to start? So I personally just quit my job and jumped into it, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I would suggest, I think there's a lot of smoother ways to go there, but then at some point you just need to do it. It doesn't help. So we founded our company almost by accident. It was for a proposal that we needed to have a legal structure, and we founded the company, and then we didn't get the funding. So, but in the end, we were very happy we did the step. Also what we learned, you need to take fast decisions. So no decisions are the worst decisions, because simply when you fall down, you better fall fast, then you stand up, you straighten up your crown, and you carry on with what you're doing and choosing the next direction. Very important. So sorry, I just jumped over, I saw. It's very important on the way, since you're falling down, to learn to cope with mistakes, rejection, and criticism, because that's where you're getting a lot. It seems to be very human to not believe in what we are doing as founders. So it's important to have this real solution that or problem you want to focus on to really solve, because you need to that's your North Star, basically, that you have and that you're following. And then very important, being a founder can be very lonely. And it can also be an emotional roller coaster. And therefore, it's really important to have a team. But Unfortunately, now my slides are kind of jumping around. It's a bit weird. And so I really believe the team is key to success, and it's super important to have a team that you can rely on and that puts you back on feet when you feel you are not able anymore to go on. So being a female founder, actually, I'm also thinking about this topic a lot, and there is a lot of quite bad news about this. So unfortunately, during the pandemic, many of you might have realized, like in general, venture capital went completely up. People are trying to invest their money, and the investments like exploded. However, female founders raised just 2% of all VC money in 2021. And we see funding to women-led companies fell during the pandemic. And this is the same basically, but also looking into it from the year 2020. So while investments were going up, the money actually given to female-founded companies went down. Whether it's only the cause of the pandemic or whether it has other reasons is not 100% clear. And also there's a very interesting study from the Harvard Business Review, which basically found out that male and female entrepreneurs get asked different questions by VCs, and it affects on how much money or funding they will get. Basically asking men more about the opportunities and women more about how to adverse risk. And every answer leads to, I think, like 600,000 K or 600K less funding. However, many people are aware of these problems, and there are also super cool opportunities for female founders. For example, there is an organization sitting in Vienna, but a European scope called Female Founders that supports female founders. I myself did the Grace Accelerator in Berlin, and it was super empowering. Also, I'm currently part of the Google for Startups Growth Academy, which is only for female founders. And also we at Women in AI had a Women in AI Accelerator program. And so this is what I want to end off with, what is really important is to have a network of other female founders that you can exchange yourself with and talk to. And to finish off my presentation, I wanted to show you a quote of the first Black woman who ever made it into the space, Mae Jemison, and she actually said, "Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations. If you adopt their attitudes, then the possibility won't exist because you will have already shut it out. You can hear other people's wisdom, but you've got to reevaluate the world for yourself." And with this, I say thank you. So this is my learnings, but it doesn't mean that they have to be the same for you. And I hope that there will be many more female founders out there very soon. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karina. Thank you for that wonderful overview. We really appreciate that. Next up, we'll have Nicole Baker, who's the CEO and co-founder at BioLogit. So Nicole, would you like to come and join us on screen and give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself? And I'll remind everyone, if you've got questions as you go or comments or thoughts, please put them in the chat so we can use them in the Q&A afterwards. Thank you. And off you go, Nicole.
Thank you. So I will follow more or less the same. So yeah, first, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk to all of you. And I hope in some way I can, be inspirational in some way, like the other ladies, and if there are other women in the audience as well that can see that there are possibilities out there to become. To have an idea and then to make a product or to make a company out of it. So I'm originally from Brazil, and I studied biology, and then I did a master's in immunology, PhD, postdoc, end up in Ireland, through Germany, UK, and so on. So I did a bit of traveling beforehand because my dream was to either travel or to do biology. So I somehow managed to do the two things at the same time. And I was very happy at the time with my choice. And I have a PhD in rheumatology, immunology. And Then I went to the industry and I worked in pharmacovigilance, which is a word, a very long word, and a lot of people probably don't know what pharmacovigilance is or didn't know before COVID what pharmacovigilance was. And with COVID, it became more apparent, and then what we actually do. And it is an important part of the development of drugs and how we can protect patients against adverse events. And I wasn't going to do that kind of little first kind of why do we do this, but I would put it a little bit in context. So drug safety is an important part of healthcare systems, and it is critical to maintain it, to have good patient outcomes. So the WHO estimates that 1 in 10 patients will suffer harm from adverse events while in care. So it's very similar as well to, and then medication errors, they do go into adverse events as well, and we call it adverse events. And within the pharmaceutical industry alone, clinical drug safety activities, which is the same as pharmacovigilance, will cost about 21 billion annually. And it's a figure that will keep going up. And because pharma companies, they will have a lot of obligations in terms of maintaining their drugs safe and making sure that they can look at any risks or adverse events that is out there. So we look at, so what is going a little bit to what I do. So this was my initial context for me to go from immunology academia into the world of pharmacovigilance, working with the industry, is that it is an art, I think, pharmacovigilance, and how you can make new drugs at the same time, make sure that they are effective and safe for patients. But the risk is always there. So we are never going to have any drugs, not even paracetamol, that is without a risk. And this industry is also a highly regulated industry because we are protecting patients here. So that's how I had, went from academia into working in pharmacovigilance. And at the time, to be honest, I didn't know what pharmacovigilance was. And so with that idea, after working for many years in the industry and seeing all the problems, I realized that a lot of the problems that was out there, they could be solved, but they weren't being solved. So I decided to give up my job and to start my journey as a female founder. So I found Biologit with Bruno Ohana. He's the co-founder, and my knowledge, as I said, is in immunology, and his knowledge is in machine learning and the whole part of the technical side of things, which now I know a bit more about. And the journey that we went with Biologit was that I started with New Frontiers, so that was the first thing that I did, and that gave me support to work with other people and to understand what it is like to have a company and to have to work for yourself, and giving you the basis of what you need to do, like from start to end. And another thing that I did, which was very important at the very beginning, was the Leo, in the regional Leos, they were giving a week, there was a week talking about startup and things like that. So there was a couple of people presenting there that gave me lots of good ideas, and New Frontiers came from that week within the Leo here in Dublin. And so I did the New Frontiers, and then I applied for a commercialization fund within Trinity. So we joined Trinity as a research group to develop our idea, because before it was just an idea, we didn't have a product or anything like that. So the idea was developed in Trinity. But the first day that we started, COVID started, so we actually never enjoyed the academic life or the life in campus in Trinity. So we started and we all went remote and worked from home. So we created a product that is completely has been completely created from everybody's home and from our team, and and then we got a lot of support in there in terms of everybody kind of being really invested in developing something with us. So then we left, so we spun in and we spun out of Trinity and started looking for money, and we got private funding and also money from, again, so the commercialization fund came from Enterprise Ireland, and then we got more money from Enterprise Ireland to match the private investment. So we are currently a fully funded company. We grew from 2 people, myself and the co-founder. I was counting yesterday to see how many people we are. We are now maybe 12, nearly 15, I think, if we count the people that working part-time. And then we have a lot of other people that are the support that we need in terms of finance, accounting, solicitors, and so on. And so I don't think I should talk too much about the product, but more about how our journey was. And I think it is an interesting journey, and there's a lot of points that was mentioned before that I think is important in terms of kind of making sure that you keep going and probably don't give up very soon, or if you realize that your idea doesn't work or is not the right thing, that you can pivot and think about doing something else. But it's a rich environment where you learn a lot. Every day is a learning experience, and you're constantly learning. And I think one thing that I learned the most, and I think I will keep it for the rest of my life, is to listen to people and listen to what people actually want. So if you want to create a product, or anything, a company or anything, and you think that's what people want, sometimes you're mistaken, because you haven't listened to what people actually want. So for the past few years now that I've been in that journey, I've learned to listen much more to people and to pay attention to the conversations, where to understand what people really want and how they want it and what would solve their problems in their day-to-day activities and the work that they're doing. So and that, I think that was my biggest learning, and I think we as CEO, I think you need to keep your eyes open to see what's out there and how fast it's changing and how the opportunities are coming and going. So when one day you can get up in the morning and you have a new opportunity, or you had an old idea that you thought would be brilliant, and then somebody else already done it, or there's different possibilities. But I think we need to keep the curiosity going and our eyes open to the changing world that we're living on. I think I will leave you with that. And yeah, and just to say as well, I think that on top of having grown the company, we have a product. So we are going to launch the product probably at the end of this month. And it's a product that so it's a three-in-one platform. So the first thing is we put data together. So we put data from the literature or from any real world data out there. And what we found with the literature is that you have big databases like PubMed and so on that have a lot of index journals that are European or American journals or English speaking countries. But there's a lot of regional journals that don't get indexed in the likes of PubMed or Embase. So we are looking for those articles and those the smaller journals too, and we ingest them. And we have a big database where we ingest data from around the globe. And then we use AI models to filter and to screen for whatever we are looking for. So in pharmacovigilance, we are looking for adverse events. And the adverse events that we're looking at are for drugs. So for example, let's say COVID. So what types of adverse events are being published for the COVID vaccine? So we can ask that question, and it will look at all the literature around the globe in any language, and then we'll filter it out and we'll present it in a workflow. And that is an activity that is has to be done by pharmaceutical companies on a monthly basis. So another I think point important that the previous speaker also said is the fact that being a highly regulated environment. So because it is a regulatory requirement to do what we are doing, I think we do have an advantage that is not something that we are developing that is good to have, but it's something that is a must, and it's part of the regulatory requirement. Yeah, I think, and then if anybody has any questions, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for that amazing walk through your world of I'm not even going to say it now. Pharma. I'll have to double check that term. It was a very long one I hadn't heard before, but fascinating, and glad you're doing it. So that's brilliant. Next, we'll have Sandra Healy. Sandra, would you like to join us on stage, on our virtual stage? And Sandra is the CEO and founder of Inclusio, and also the founder of the DCU's Centre of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion. So Sandra, would you like to give us a little overview of your world too, please?
Well, thank you, Claire, and thanks everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm going to just put my slides up on the screen, and I'll talk you through the slides, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. So this morning I'm going to very briefly just take you through my journey and Inclusio and where we are and some of the challenges that we've met along the way. To give you just a little bit of background, I spent 20 years in the telecoms industry, and the last 5 years in Dublin City University, where I spun out Inclusio in December 2020 into a COVID world, which brought a whole other set of challenges. And as Claire mentioned, when I was in the university, I set up the DCU Centre of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion. But I went in with an idea to solve a problem that I had experienced as a D&I practitioner in industry. And that was, how do you bring an evidence-based approach to the work I was doing? So what I realized is, on one side of the work I was doing around customer delivery and customer experience and sales, I had really clear KPIs and a way to evidence the impact of my work to the business. And yet here I was doing this very meaningful work in diversity and inclusion with no way to show how important it was. So when I went into DCU, I went in with the idea and I said, you know, you've probably only got me for about 2 years. I want to build this software tool. And they said, let's do it together. So while I was in the university, I applied for Enterprise Ireland commercialization funding, and the rest is history. 2 co-founders came and joined me. We built the team, and then we spun Inclusio out. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our journey since then. We've won lots of different awards, which is brilliant. It's great recognition, really, really important when you're a small startup. I think that's something that is a big shift and a big challenge for a lot of people, particularly if you're coming out of a corporate environment where you're used to having a badge on you that's recognizable, that when you come out into your own organization, you have to kind of almost start all over again. And this is why, and I think both the previous speakers have said how the importance of networking and building your network, because that's what will help you then land well when you spin out or establish your own business. So what's the problem we set out to solve? So just very briefly, these are 3 kind of key points, right? So this is a report here from the Hayes report in Ireland, which shows over 72% of people will actively research diversity and inclusion and the culture of an organization before they'll even consider applying for a job. I've seen an Accenture report actually that shows that that's over 80%. And if you look at here, this is a report from the US, you know, 223 billion lost in the last 5 years due to poor culture. And 1 in 5 Americans have now left a job due to poor company culture. Very similar reports here. You can see in the UK, 34% of employees have quit their jobs as a result of a dissatisfaction with the culture. And in fact, what we're starting to see now, they're describing 2022 as the year of the worker, the year of the employee, where employees demand that their employer, you know, act ethically, respond to discrimination. And I think what's happening is the younger generations really are driving change in the workforce. And that creates a great opportunity for Inclusio, because that's what Inclusio set out to address this issue head on for employees, but also for organizations. So what do we do? So I described the software, 4 years in research and development in Dublin City University. We combined technology, psychology, and artificial intelligence. So essentially what we've done is we built and trained and engineered the algorithms to make ethical decisions around diversity and inclusion. And that machine is learning all the time. So the critical mass, as we grow and we collect more and more insights and information, it means that the ethical AI will become more valuable. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that now in a minute. So what do we do? It's a data-driven, insights-led diversity and inclusion platform. And we describe what we do is get real actionable data and insights for the organization. And it's all through the voice of the employees. I think Karina mentioned around the importance of research, and research really, really is important. Like we did deep dive analysis with 35 organizations before we wrote one line of code, because we wanted to get a sense of what's the problem we're trying to solve. And essentially what we found is that organizations really struggle to collect diversity data. That was the first problem that we uncovered. And the second thing was they said, you know, we're doing all this really great work on diversity and inclusion, but we don't know if it's having any impact. But then when we spoke to the individuals in the companies, they said, we do not like disclosing personal things about ourselves and having that attached to our record. And we do have internal reporting systems, but we don't trust the confidentiality. So it was with those two pieces, those two problems that we set out to solve. So essentially what we've done is we've built it's a diversity and inclusion platform. We have behavioral science nudge embedded in, and it's third party. It sits outside the organization, and it allows employees to safely and securely and anonymously give their feedback, build a very deep, over 100 demographic data points, build their diversity profile. We've identified 24 scientific metrics and combined them uniquely to measure culture and inclusion, and measure what the lived experience is like for the people on the ground. So things like belonging, trust, job satisfaction, psychological safety. So lots of different insights that give the employer a real sense around what's the culture like here, where are our strengths, what's our weaknesses, and where do we need to take action. Human-centered design, really, really important for me, that we built software that people like to use, that's intuitive, it looks and feels like software that we would use in our everyday life. We put a really huge amount of effort into the UX and UI design. We tested with organizations like Sodexo, PayPal, Allianz Worldwide Care, AIB, Fenergo, and many others over 4 years, testing the usability and the design, because we really wanted to make sure that what we built was something that was cutting edge and would really drive exceptional participation rates. And thankfully that is working for us. And then the anonymous reporting piece, the banking sector actually came to us and said, look, you know, I know that's on your roadmap for further down the line, but we think it's something that you should build in now, which is the anonymous reporting aspect of it. So that allows employees to safely and securely report into the organization around, you know, it could be anything, discrimination, inequality, whatever is happening for them on the ground. And then the localization, really, really important for us. You know, we're resisting at the moment, you know, we're a European solution. Our expertise is European equality law, GDPR, all of that. And it's important for us to stay and focus on solving the problem for Europe. However, one of the challenges we have is getting funding, and I think Karina mentioned that as well. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. So what comes out the other side of Inclusio? So this is just very briefly, just to give you an insight into some of the stats that we collect. Gender identity, LGBTQI+, neurodiversity, race, ethnicity, generational diversity. You can see here we do pulse around company ratings, work-life balance, and we can intersectionally look at all this data. That's what the really, really powerful piece of it is. Socioeconomic background, you can see there's just 4 metrics there: belonging, trust, sentiment, and hobbies, and lots of different things we collect information on. So where are we so far? So if I was to think about what are the challenges we faced, like back in 2016, I remember I went in and I pitched to a female founders program, and I was talking about diversity, inclusion, and compliance. And I remember I describe it as the tumbleweed moment, where there were 7 people sitting across the table from me, and they were going, "What are you talking about?" I don't think back in that day, diversity and inclusion was seen as a nice to have. It certainly wasn't seen as something that would be linked to compliance or brought into that world. And what's quite interesting now is, you know, we spent 4 years in research and development and really in deep tech in the university to build a cutting edge solution. And what we have found now is that diversity and inclusion technology is actually an emerging market that's growing year on year. And really what's driving the growth of that is, you know, ESG reporting, employees demanding that their employer act ethically, and shareholders and board members in, you know, demanding that the company is run sustainably. And all of that is driving business for us, essentially, because we are the independent third-party external assessor around all of those things. Financial services, for example, have mandatory reporting every year into central bank. And one of the projects we're working on now is with the insurance industry to develop a certification model and a report structure that's sufficient enough for insurance companies to respond to central bank annual mandatory reporting. Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, again, Karina mentioned this, 2% of funding, and it's going in the opposite direction. So this year, I think less funding was given to women-led businesses. And the problem with this is what we're seeing is that there's less women being funded, and when women are funded, there's less funding going into their businesses, which is a real challenge. Like, even if I think about myself, I spun out on the 1st of December 2020, and I had to do over 40 presentations through COVID. In fairness, most of them were online, to get our seed round of funding, which thankfully we secured last September. We had only just got that in the bank, and now we are straight into EIC application, European Disruptive Technology Fund, and straight in, because it's disruptive technology, it's AI based, it's expensive to build, it needs to be built before we can sell it, and that becomes the challenge. How do you fund that, you know, and particularly when it's an emerging market like diversity and inclusion? We want to stay in the EU. That's a big challenge for us. You know, if we were to take our solution to Silicon Valley, and we've had people come to us to, you know, trying to encourage us to go to Silicon Valley, that would mean we would have to pick the company up, take it to the US and develop it and focus on the US market. I'm not saying we're not going to go into the US market. Absolutely, we will. But it means then that all that kind of credibility and knowledge that we've invested into it in being a solution for Europe it will get left behind, which is not really where we want to be. The opportunity, it's a global market, you know, D&I technology, 15 billion market, 12% growth year on year, huge opportunity. And thankfully, we've brought the solution to the market just at the right time. So what keeps us going, you know, and again, I think both of the other speakers mentioned this, you know, we are a social impact organization. We get up every day, every single person that works in the company is committed to the purpose and committed to that driving change and creating workplaces where people want to work, creating safe working environments. So that's really, really what drives us. You know, obviously we will build a hugely successful organization, but that's not that's not our main purpose for us. It really is around driving change and making people's lives better. Advancing research, for me, that's really important. So because the way we've scientifically built the insights into the software, we're going to be able to, through the interrogation of the aggregated data, we will be able to drive and shift the world of organizational psychology and learning more around things like neurodiversity in work, learning more around things like inclusion in work. And this is my last slide. I remember it was probably about 6 years ago, I sent this to the CEO of Enterprise Ireland at the time. And I said to her, I heard you speak and this is what has come to me. So there is no right time, there is no good time, there is no time. If entrepreneurship is in you, it's in you. And I think you have to follow that. Certainly that has been my life. I think my CV is probably about 4 pages long, and it was time now for me to do what has always been in me, which has been start my own company. So whatever you can do or dream you can do, I would say begin it now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you so much. And now I'll invite back Karina and Nicole back again with us to go into the Q&A part of the session, if that's all right. I just want to start by saying what amazing, and thank you so much for sharing all your stories. It's amazing to hear them. I also wanted to note that the thing that jumped out at me almost immediately was the fact that none of you are actually coming from an AI background. You're all coming from other disciplines where you've seen a problem and then brought your powers to bear on that. So my first question is, as AI startups, how has been your journey in terms of actually learning about the AI and machine learning part of the business, right? So Karina, I think you mentioned your brother came with the machine learning part of it, but I want to know how has that journey been? How has it been for you? How have you done it? Any tips on actually getting to grips with the technical part that builds your business? Karina, I'll start with you. You working with family. That was an interesting one. So
yeah, no, thanks. Actually, it's a very interesting question, and it's also what we see in Women in AI, like how to get started, with the technical part, right? And so for me, it was really, I was lucky to have a technical co-founder from the beginning, so I tried to dig into the technology at some point, but to be honest, at some point I said I need to focus on a lot of other things. There is so much about building an AI company, also about pricing, all the things you have to, about what is the product actually. Like this took us some time. We went the wrong way. We thought we needed first an app to collect data, to then build a model, to then feed it, and didn't see that we could have done another way. So I think there's a lot around just building the technology, also in the sense of legal requirements, ethics, trustworthiness, what is required, or the tax expertise, which, by the way, also doesn't come from my side. So we have a tax consultant in the business who defines the features, who helps us prioritize and make sure that we are on the right track. And there is really a lot around it. However, I really enjoy AI. So for me personally, I studied human rights and I never found the angle which was mine. Like, I'm super passionate about making the world a better place, and always super empathic or sad if I hear about human rights violations and I feel there needs to be change. However, I never found my angle. And then when I swapped into this direction of AI, having this intersection of legal, ethical, societal, economic requirements around the topic, which are huge, and which show how interdisciplinary the field is, I really found my angle. And I think so you don't need to be a machine learning engineer to be an AI expert. But if you want to be, then you need to start coding Python and so on and dig into it. But there's great courses on Coursera, but you don't have to be an expert in AI.
I think that's a wonderful insight, and I think it speaks to the opportunity for getting more diverse representation in the AI industry as a whole, because just knowing that you can add so much and bring so much to the business and even to the AI implementation without understanding how to build machine learning code is an amazing insight. So Nicole, what about you? From your perspective, how has the journey been?
I think AI will not exist if there wasn't a problem, if there wasn't a solution to solve. So there's the two sides of it. There's the very technical part of it that needs to be done by it's the same, a doctor. Like, you might like medicine, but you're not going to go and treat a patient if you don't know how to treat a patient, because that needs the skill and you need to study for that. So I think it's the same thing for AI. It is not my background, and I would have to change. I would have to study many years to get to the point where I'm actually able to code. But I think there's no AI if there isn't a problem or solution to solve. And that is something that we found to be very important, and important for our business, is that we work together. So it's a very close net group. So the engineers work with the medics and with the other side of the team to answer the questions. And in terms of AI, I think the most important thing as well is the label, because if you don't label your data properly, you might never have the answers and the the results that you're looking for. So we have our own team, internal team that does all the labeling, and they are all experts in the area. So they're all experts in pharmacovigilance, and they know how to label and answer the questions. So I can see the future where more companies will have AI engineers or engineers working with the other teams together, and they will be able to even code on the go for new models. But at the moment in the industry where we are, we cannot have an AI that moves with the coder, the user, because it is a highly regulated environment, and our code has to go through a lot of validation to make sure that it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So I think that's what is going to move. You're going to have more communication between teams, and teams are not going to work in silo, and they are going to work together to produce an end solution to the problem that you're trying to solve.
It's fascinating because it sounds like from how you're describing this, in order to actually get the AI applied to real industry problems, possibly the biggest skill you need is collaboration and listening. Someone mentioned the importance of listening, So isn't it funny that that's a skill that perhaps isn't often maybe mentioned in when you think about getting to grips with AI, but actually that collaboration between the business angle and the technical angle is so important, particularly I think in this area in AI, because it's so applied and it's not necessarily easy to cognitively grasp how the thing works together. So that's a fantastic insight. Thank you, Nicole. And Sandra, how about you?
One little point as well is the transparency. So we are working in transparency, how we build the models, and that is and the ethical side of it as well, because we are working on an industry. I keep going back to the industry, but it is an industry that needs to be ethic and transparent. So we are working towards that as well, and with basis on that.
Fantastic, thank you. So Sandra, how about you? How's the journey been in terms of getting to grips with the technical side of things, or working with your technical co-founders?
Yeah, so I suppose my background is I'm technical engineering, but it's more on global networks rather than AI or coding, which is quite interesting. So I've always had that kind of engineering mindset and graphic design as well. So I think and psychology. So by the time you bring all of those things together, it's quite interesting in my head, I can tell you. and then what we did is Arthur. So Arthur Labambo is one of our co-founders, and Deborah Murphy is another co-founder. So Deborah's is kind of tool design and, and leading and building software teams. And Arthur's background is AI, machine learning, natural language processing. And actually another one of my skills is I'm a master practitioner in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So when myself and Arthur get together in a room, it's actually scary. I think people run because we have phenomenal conversations, and it's between both of us that we have built and trained the AI. So what I bring, he brings the data science and I bring the people science. So, and then we were able to test and engineer and test those algorithms while we were in the university. We were able to tap into then people like Professor Alan Smeaton in the Adapt Insight Center, so to work with him and his team. But we describe what we do as behavioral data science, and that's what it is, and we challenge each other all the time. I will bring the people into the code and the person and the human into the code in a way that maybe Arthur probably hasn't thought about. And then Arthur is able to interrogate the data in a way that I haven't thought about, making assumptions and bringing things together and coding how decisions are made. So it's a very interesting journey. I don't know if there's another machine out there doing what we are doing. I don't think so, because we're teaching the machine diversity and inclusion. We're teaching it around, tracking return on investment. We're teaching it how to make ethical decisions around human differences. So what's the same and what's different? It's very interesting. What I'm really excited about is when we have the critical mass of data that we can start to drive change, because the accuracy of what's there is unshakable, really, and that's where we need to get to. And one of the things, just one last thing to say, one of the things that academics really struggle with is data collection. How do you get people to test my instrument? How do I know that what I've built is accurate? and we have an opportunity to help them with that. We can help them test that.
And so, I mean, one of the points that was brought up about that idea of the time it takes and the expense it takes to build an AI solution as opposed to perhaps some other kind of technical digital transformation solution. There is lag in AI solutions where you have to build the data, and you can't really necessarily sell your product until you build the data. So there's a kind of a chicken and a horse, or cart and a horse, whatever, chicken and egg, cart and a horse scenario going on there. So can you describe how long it took each of you to actually get to the point where, you know, from starting the work to getting to a point where you could actually sell your solution? Like what is that time length, just to give people an indication of how long that takes?
I was asked also how much would cost, and
Oh.
I was actually asked yesterday, how much would you say it costed? So how long? So for us, it took at least, because we started working on the testing environment and the development environment, and now we are moving into production. So it took at least 2 years and 500,000. Plus all the hours that we worked on ourselves, and
I think it's good to give people a realistic kind of grasp about what they're getting into when they start on these journeys. So thank you for sharing, Nicole. How about you, Sandra? We'll go to you next. How about from Inclusio's perspective?
Yes, that's a big question. We were funded through Enterprise Ireland, so we secured over 500,000 while we were in the university. So that was and that's not to count, as Nicole said, the countless unpaid hours and effort of work over 4 years that went into that. I think, and all along, whatever way we look at the figures, it looks like it's going to cost about 5 million to bring solution to the point of where it's at a commercial scalable opportunity. So it's probably going to be 5 years, 5 million. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of when you're working with deep tech.
Yeah. And it's a good pointer to say this is what's needed. When we were talking, everyone kind of commented on the funding requirement and what's necessary here. So it's a good signal back to the system to say that's what we need, more of it. Karina, what about yourself? What's your perspective on that?
So we haven't really finished in developing the entire software yet, or program yet. And so we are in the process. And I think what is so hard is that you iterate, you might change, you might discover new things. So obviously we didn't always go the smartest way. We had to go back to another way. But what I would like to share, like what we came up now with, is we are having actually a small data approach, which I didn't mention before because I thought it was maybe a bit technical, but we have a small data approach and we really focus on the feedback of the expert. So we created this platform where you have directly the feedback from the expert going into the data and the model itself, and then learning. But as said beforehand by Nicole, this is only possible for certain processes because you also ask, we need full transparency. And today, machine learning models or deep neural networks are still a bit of these black boxes, and we are working currently on explicability methods, but it doesn't really help you 100% to understand. So the more regulated you are, and there is the European Union, the European Commission's draft on artificial intelligence coming out, the AI Act, and it has this high risk based approach. And so this is something to really consider also. But I can't tell from the timing because we haven't finished, but we took up to now like 2 years, yeah. But working next to it and starting a bit, different time frames.
Well, thank you all for sharing that. And I'm going to build on what you just said, Karina, and take in one of the questions from the chat, which is about ethical AI. So, all of your purpose and mission comes so clear, so strongly from what you've described so far. And you've all touched on this idea of making sure that it's ethical and transparent. But how do you know it's ethical enough? How do you know that your AI is ethical? Now, there's the framework coming out from the European Commission in terms of like looking at high risk, low risk. But do you employ any frameworks or tests, or is it, how do you practically go about ensuring ethical AI? Anyone want to start with that one?
I can start. So we can measure against one, we have a human in the loop. So there's always a human in the loop, and the human for what we do. For example, you're looking for adverse events in publications. So if you find, the AI will find the adverse event and will present it to you, and then you as a human or as a healthcare practitioner will decide, yes, I agree or I disagree. And one, just on one funny thing at the very beginning when we started, when we had the team looking at the labels and kind of saying right, wrong for the AI had decided, they had a tendency to think that the AI was always right, and that's not true. So we said, no, you have to challenge the AI, you have to challenge the model, you need to, you know, there's the human in the loop for that reason. You are the one that making the final decision. So basically on our models, there's a human in the loop, and the human is making the final decision. And the transparency is that all the data is presented, but obviously if you're reviewing 2,000 articles or 20,000 articles as a human, that will take you a long time, and you will make errors because of the volume of data that will be presented to you. So the AI actually probably would work better than a human, but the final decision will be made by a human to look at that basically, to look at that information and make a decision on what to do with it. And the transparency is, and you can do tests as well. So we're constantly testing to see how good or how it is performing, and there is check at the back that are making sure that the recall and all the information is there and it's being calculated for you, and that is transparent so that the person can using it can see. But I think this, and when you look at data retrospectively, you know what was picked up by a human, and you compare to what the AI is doing, and it should be comparable. So for the pharmaceutical industry, what it says is that if the AI can do the job the same as a human or better than a human, then that's enough.
So you look to that. Well, I'm not going to ask everyone else that question because there's one more question come in. We've only got 4 minutes left. So I think this one is a great one because I was thinking at the same time as Gina shared it in the chat as well. And it's back to this idea that you all seem to be touching on regulated industries or are servicing some regulation need. And you know, it struck me that perhaps if anyone else is thinking about businesses in the AI, they should go fishing in what's needed to be done from a regulatory perspective, where the pain points are there, and that seems to be a great place to find the problems that the world needs addressing, and that's one thing. But Gina's question is about how do you keep up with all the regulatory changes? So Karina, you mentioned that the new acts are coming out. You're all sounding incredibly busy. There's lots of work to be done in your day-to-day jobs, regardless of all the changing environments. So how do you manage to keep track of what's changing in the regulatory environment? Karina, I'll ask you first.
So I think for a startup, I mean, you know, in my case, I am a human rights lawyer and I am super passionate about this topic. So that's kind of my hobby to be on top of those things. But I think for a normal, like also referring with the ISO standards, so they're currently in development. So there is no clear standards yet. And also to keep up for a startup is super hard. And what I'm personally fighting for is having like standards and then maybe getting to a certification like for cars before you put them or food industry. This is something they're thinking about, but it really shouldn't. It's super, I support it, but it shouldn't then be too expensive or too burdensome for a startup to lose one workforce simply trying to get a certification process being done. So I think it's quite hard, but from the logic, I think you can get into it quite easily because it's this risk-based approach, and you go to the draft and you see, okay, so there shouldn't be any social scoring. It's probably never going to be allowed in Europe. And it can hurt various human rights. So you do this kind of impact assessments, but then there are other areas like recruiting, education, facial recognition in certain circumstances where you might be on the border, and then you just have to look into what's going to happen.
So you'd build that into your kind of regular rhythm of the business just to keep a check in on what's happening in those areas that you're dependent on.
You have to, you're not, I mean, otherwise you might have to shut down at some point if you didn't build it from the human-centered thinking from the first place. But it's really a burden for like having this next to your idea of just having like a product brought to market, which is hard enough. So
a pain, but also an opportunity. Sandra, what about
necessary,
you?
yeah,
Necessary.
At some point of it, at least. Yeah.
How do you keep up with everything that's changing in the world of regulatory requirements?
Well, I think a combination of what both of the other panelists have said, and we also have, it's bringing that skill into the business. So, you know, I'm very passionate about, from a diversity and inclusion and organizational psychology perspective, I live and breathe it. So I'm constantly learning about the psychology side of it, but we can't always be relying on me as the busy CEO to be bringing that in. Yeah. So the people science team are very, you know, we're connected into academic partners and collaborators. That's important. From an AI perspective, and for us, what we need to keep our focus on is equality law, so equality legislation. So it's not just around the tech side of things and ethical AI. It's also around, you know, the shifting landscape of equality law, which is interpreted differently in every country that we go into. So we have a team. We have a data privacy team that we build, academic law and law background. And that's what you do. You just have to build that into the cost of your business, and because it's so critically important.
Okay, thank you. Look, we've come to the end of the webinar. It was so much a pleasure to meet you all and hear your stories, and thank you for sharing all that. I'll end on that note that some people mentioned about the importance of community and networks, and I'm just thinking, look at what we've learned from you here today. So I would second that and say that seems to be an incredibly important way to keep up with things, and to also find a supportive community to help share learnings and move forward. And I want to say thank you, huge thank you to Karina, to Nicole, to Sandra, and to say thank you to all of you who joined us today, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar, which will be coming up, I think, shortly. Keep an eye out on the ICT SkillNet website. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.